Thank you for joining me. Now, we've done one of these takes already, and so we're not going to cover the first take. I'm going to have to like splice that together.
There you go.
But we were going to talk about Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
We were going to talk about how do we evolve our product, just like Bryan Cranston evolved his career.
Multiple times. Yeah.
Exactly. And we were saying how legal tech is different to consumer tech, where you don't have the luxury of losing 1,000 customers a day through experimentation. And so how have you gone about this process of evolving and improving your product to meet your customers?
So it depends on the product, and it depends on your go-to-market strategy. For products that have a product-led growth PLG motion built into them, you may need to go down that path. But ideally, before you get to the PLG part, you've done enough iteration to know that, okay, you have a core set of features that people like, that have those viral loops and coefficients built in to actually drive the PLG engine. Most legal tech products aren't like that.
No.
Right? They don't really have PLG. And frankly, PLG is what people assume is the easiest thing to start with, because it seemed, if you think about it from an investor point of view, that yes, of course, we're going to have a product that has invitations built into it. You'll invite your friends, they'll invite their friends, they'll invite their clients, everyone's using it before we know it.
For the products.
Exactly.
So it's shipped out, people have a link back.
Yep. Before you know it, you have millions of users.
Virality.
Everyone's very happy. Really difficult to execute.
Yeah.
In fact, most products that are successful PLG products today didn't start at that, right? They started as something that eventually evolved into that PLG motion once they were able to tailor and capture that feedback. So I guess part of it is you need to, before you can even think about improving your product, and one of the ways you do that is by improving your understanding of who the product is for and what problem are you actually looking to solve. Again, most startups, I'd love to get your take on it. Most startups start with the broad worldviews. We are for all lawyers. Let's just focus on legal, right? We're for all lawyers. We can use it for everything. And that's probably true. That message is very generic and it doesn't help. You should have some messaging somewhere that helps to not just convince your core users, those that get immediate value, right? Your low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But at the same time, you probably also want to just cut out a lot of the stuff in there that saves people time. So they come to your website, they speak to you, and you should be able to tell them, I know you're on e-discovery. Our product it might seem like it would be useful for e-discovery. Maybe it will. That's just not our core focus. So if it helps, let me just tell you the 2-sentence pitch about it, and then I'll let you decide. And that way, maybe they don't need to be there for 35 minutes, right? Just mindlessly sitting through a demo and also scrolling through their emails because they're like, well, why is this person even talking to me? So I think you have to be able to know who it's for, but who it's not for, and be very, very explicit and obvious about it. That's one way to start thinking about this, and then obviously it evolves from there. I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting approach because, you're talking about what is the right starting point.
Yeah.
Like where do you even begin the journey to evolve your product?
Yeah.
And for us, it's been interesting because we started at 2018. We started life having kind of accidentally stumbled onto a language model.
Right.
And it's like, hey, this is really powerful.
Right.
This is your in the transactional lawyers world.
Yeah.
Your post-HERA era technology.
Yeah.
And we're like, we can build something out of this.
Yeah.
We can do something really powerful. And like you, we're like, this can help with everything.
Yeah.
Now that's a lot of pie to chew off.
Yeah.
And we actually started working with a couple of law firms who were really friendly with us and gave us feedback and all that. And what we discovered was, yes, it can probably help with everything.
Right.
Like generative AI.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But it's not really going to be an easy on-ramp because it's like giving someone a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, I can do everything with this, but I can't do anything well. So we need to find that problems that people would pay money for and then expand from there.
I'm gonna not disagree with you, but I think I do agree with the Swiss Army knife analogy, except that actually with a Swiss Army knife, you can be good at each of the different functions. But there's a different skill involved with each component with the Swiss Army knife. Right? So while you can use the Swiss Army knife to cut things, and it has a knife there, obviously, it may also include a flint. But just because it has a flint doesn't mean that I can expect anyone who has a Swiss Army knife to go out into the wild and start a fire. You need a skill, and it's just understanding that for most people, being able to cut things with the knife portion is the easiest part for them to begin with. And the other components actually maybe stay hidden, right? They're folded into the knife itself. The first component you unfold is the knife. You get them used to that. And then you say, look, once you're there, maybe phase 2, phase 3, whatever it might be, is the rest of the Swiss Army knife. And I think the difficult part is knowing which bit to expose first. Because when you speak to your customers, you get, and I say you, like we get 2 bits of feedback. One is someone looking for a very specific solution to a well-defined problem. Love them. Absolutely love those individuals, those sort of unicorns that are out there.
They've done all the thinking for you.
Right. They've thought about it enough. They've been thinking about it usually for long enough to come to the table and say, this is what we want to do. But usually in the back of their mind is the second category of people, which is we want one tool that does all of these things. I'll be completely honest, everyone loves the idea. I love the idea of having one tool that can solve all of my problems, right? If we have a CRM internally in our revenue organization that I can use to capture meetings, appointments, send emails, track our ARR, do all of these things, amazing. But the cost of being able to do all of those things is the increasing complexity. And unless you can very carefully figure out how to modularize that so only some people are exposed to something else, you get really bad experiences. You get something where people open it and they're taken aback by, oh my God, where do I begin? There is so much here. It's the, in the old days where they still use that reference. You go to Photoshop, you open Photoshop, it's like, all I need to do is resize an image. What do I select from this, even the panel on the left? I've got my layers, I've got all my histogram, everything on the right. All I want to do is just resize this image, maybe reduce the size, compress it for the web, right? Back when people cared so much about that. And really all they need is go to file and save or export as, and then you select like PNG, JPEG, whatever. You don't need all of the other stuff for the most part. For some people they do, and then you get newer tools as a result of that, right? Whether it's a Lightroom for photographers or whether it's just an online tool that resizes a photo for you. So it's figuring that information out. So I guess the biggest challenge is, as a founder, part of your role is, and I don't think it's a founder thing, as an executive or as someone who's speaking about the product. That's probably the best way to frame it. You should, I think, wear 2 hats. One is the very niche, how can you get value from this as quickly as possible? Your time to value being as low as possible. And second is the person who wants to sell them on the long-term vision, right? Because you should have probably a very arrogant, out there, lofty vision of, in 5 years' time, it would be absurd if you're not leveraging something like this. Right? Or this is how we think things are going to change in 2, 3, 5, 10 years time. And that's not today, right? Right now, let's give you 10x improvement on how you're working. And in 5 years, we'll deliver 100x. But we need enough people to get on the train to build the momentum and give the revenue, give the feedback, more importantly, to actually get to the 100x. Because there's a lot of variables in getting to that 100x. It could go in exactly how you might envision it the first time you discovered the large language model and the
Because I
post-Kira
am
era.
Steve Jobs.
Of course, I can clearly tell that. Just missing the turtleneck. Or it could be it might go in a completely different direction, right? Now the evolution of large language models as they are,
Yep.
I don't know. Like you might be like, oh my God, the things that we thought were so difficult 2 years ago, I know we can ship in a
snap
quarter.
your fingers. Yeah. But it's interesting as you say that, because I think several things flow out of that. For me, first is, how do you listen to your customers? How do you encourage your customers to give you feedback? Because they would only do that if they believe that the product has longevity.
Yeah.
So it's worth their time giving you feedback. Otherwise, they're like, sorry, unsubscribe, I'll see you later.
Yeah.
And second is, how do you distill the feedback, and they could be conflicting for many customers, into a singular product roadmap? Because we don't have the luxury of releasing 15 different versions.
Yeah, right.
Simply because our engineering team
Yeah.
is not 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So how do you get customers to give you feedback?
Yeah.
How do you distill the feedback?
Yeah. I think it's also, how do you capture and come back to the feedback? We were talking about this before. I think trying to create as tight a feedback loop as possible between anyone who's customer facing, which, for startups early on is probably most of the company.
Yep.
But as you get bigger and bigger, that feedback loop usually is the very first thing to go away. And I think we've all, worked with large vendors, not just in legal tech, elsewhere as well, where you're providing feedback and it feels like it's falling on deaf ears. And it's a problem. I think one of the biggest advantages startups have is, and it's not to say that you're going to action everything, but you should be able to capture feedback from meeting today, and it should go into a product discussion tomorrow to at least look at, okay, how does this fit into our roadmap? What is the impact of all of this? And what are the dependencies? Because you might think the idea the customer's just given you is the best thing ever. But in order to execute on that, you've got to be able to tackle the rest, right? The next three things, and you've got to manage your technical debt and everything else. So I think that feedback piece is critical. How do you track it? It's pretty easy for most people, right? There's plenty of tools.
It's a Jira board or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
That bit is not that bad. I think the harder fit, and I don't know if everyone agrees with this or not. I'm not sure what I agree with or not, to be honest, but having your roadmaps being public facing, part of your roadmap, not your entire roadmap, right? At least a high level roadmap, make it public facing. So people, before they come to you or during the discussion, you can share that with them. Here's what we're thinking about, all right? Here's what we're developing, researching, and what's coming up at some point. So they can already see, because it might be that it gives people a bit more of an idea. It gives them sort of a grounded basis for the kinds of suggestions they might make. The danger is you may be unconsciously affecting what they're suggesting.
Yes.
So the feedback conversations are, a very delicate dance of asking very open-ended, what do you think? How do you work kind of question, but also pointed questions of, here's a Figma diagram. Give us your reaction and feedback on this thing. We've already gone and done the work, so we know the problem to solve. Would you use this? And those are very different conversations.
It's the multiple hats you mentioned earlier. Like as a product owner, I want to get open-ended feedback. As a salesperson, I want to get the customers excited.
Yeah.
And so you have to balance the two sides.
I think customers get excited when you can share the honest, transparent message with them. And we can do this today. We're working on this, and we should have this in the next quarter, 2 quarters. And we will eventually get some of these things, but I can't tell you when. Right? I think especially in legal tech, and I'll speak to Lopez, because certainly in my world, what most firms don't want is empty promises that you're not going to deliver on.
Right.
And I think you earn a lot of trust by being vulnerable and saying, look, we don't know if we're going to be able to do this in this year, right? And as a putting a salesperson's hat on, it's a really difficult thing to have that conversation with a customer, because you know, maybe just giving them enough hope is going to accelerate this deal.
Yeah.
But the sad, well, not really the sad truth, the reality is, usually you have to follow through with that. And
Yes.
at least what I say, because I can, and I'm in a nice position to, look, I don't control our roadmap. I can only tell you what's being built now.
Yep.
I'm not going to make any promises to you that I don't know for certain that they're happening in the next X period. Let me get information, because frankly, I'm not doing this work. So I can tell you that this will happen this time, but it's not like I'm going in there and developing all this thing. You may have a different view on that, but still, like, you want to balance that, right? You don't want to unduly promise something that you know isn't going to happen. No one wants that. You don't want to start your relationship with a new customer based on them being disappointed that you're not delivering against what you told them.
I find there's a different problem from my side, which is there are so many possible things that we can be doing that we have to be selective to say, sorry, that's not our focus. We are not going to give you that. And so one example is maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than a year ago, one of the firms that we're working with was like, you know what, your tool is great. It helps us find the content that we need when we're drafting, when we're reviewing stuff.
Yeah.
Can you also put in the proofreading tool?
Right.
Can you spell check? Can you do cross-reference checks? Can you do capitalization checks?
Yeah.
And the answer was, no, because you've already got so many possible tools that solve for that.
Yeah.
And if we deliver a half-assed solution to you, you're not going to be happy.
Yes.
And it's not where we can bring value. It's not a differentiator for us.
Yeah.
So sorry, but here's a number for Definely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's what I sort of alluded to earlier, right? People want a all-in-one solution. Yeah. Sadly, there is not really a all-in-one solution. There just isn't. The sooner you can realize that you're not going to please everyone.
Yep.
Because if you try and please everyone, you get maybe a well-utilized solution that people are then very quickly looking for something very specialized.
Yes.
And that cycle just continues on and on and on, right? You get the bundling, then the unbundling, and it just happened over and over again. Even in just legal tech, you've seen that happen multiple times, where a bunch of companies get bought, they get consolidated, then you get a big fat solution that solves a big problem, but in a very high level way. And then a new startup comes in that
solves
says
these little niche,
one individual specific point problem, and then they get bought out by someone else, and off we go again. So it's having that conversation. It's a tough one, because I completely understand and empathize with the firms on the other side or the clients on the other side, which is, look, we don't want to manage 50 different applications. That's usually what it is, not always. And it's also confusing for the user, right? Where do we go? Do we go to Word to do this? Do we use a Kira? Do we use this product or that product to do these things? What actually happens? And so you do have to think about, and again, I think this is where you as a vendor should be able to say, this is where we sit in your stack. And usually this is how users come to our product. This is the stage they use it, and this is the exit point, right? And those things have to come from feedback. You have to have people experience it enough, and then you evolve over time, and maybe you build integrations, or maybe you just become very clear in training and in your communication. And hey, you got to this point, but if you need to do X, go here. If you need to do Y, go here. And maybe you can work with those brands and say, look, we have a good relationship with, legal tech company X. So if you ever want to do this, perfect. I will put you in touch with the founder or with their sales team, and you can talk to them. That's just not our specialty. And that's, again, like, all of these things are easy to say, but it's really difficult. Difficult to do, right? When you're trying to fight against, trying to get customers, revenue, get traction, all of those things. But I do think the core of this for me is, in conversations, you should lead these conversations as the product expert with very strong opinions, so loosely held. Right? I go in, I'm an expert in my product. I know how it should be used, it could be used, but I'm not an expert in your culture, your firm. I've read things, I may have worked with you before, but things change pretty rapidly. So I don't know. So I'll come in with my opinions, but I have no ego in there. Like challenge and smash them down, that's fine. Right? Ultimately, it's sort of finding a balance between those two things. And that should drive. And I guess the advantages for both of us and our companies is we're driven by customer feedback, right? Like I think we're both happy to get feedback and say, you know what, this is great. Like, you're using it, and this seems like a pretty good ways to evolve and build on this product or this feature or this very small thing, this interaction that you have. I don't know if that's how you work, or how do you actually think about the development of your product?
So the evolution. So before I go talk about the evolution of our product, I want to say that little snippet just now of loosely held strong opinions. That's making it on LinkedIn. That's fantastic. As to like the evolution of our product, like we have several law firms that we give the status of development partner to.
Yeah.
And for those firms, they get a discount on our price. It's a very kind of, we don't offer that to everybody.
Right.
And the reason we don't offer it to everybody is because we want to make sure a law firm has a sufficient commitment to give us that feedback.
Yeah.
And if you do, then it's like, you know what, you're helping us, so we're going to give you a discount.
Yeah.
And those are the relationships where we get to push the boundaries of what our products already do.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, you know what? We know that we can solve problem A, B, and C. We know there are ancillary problems that we could start looking at. But before we go and dedicate our time in solving these ancillary problems or developing something else, would you buy it?
Yeah.
How would you use it?
Yeah.
What's your user journey?
Yeah.
And for us, that's how we develop our products. So rather than having these informal relationships with law firms and saying, look, you're one of our customers, we'll listen to you and so on, we do that anyway. But there is a special status where you go, you commit, we commit, and we're going to build something together.
Yeah. And I think it's making sure that there's some skin in the game from both sides, right? You don't want to spend dev resources on something that may or may not result in a deal or in a customer. And you also want the feedback as you build it, right? It's not, it's not the old adage of let's just jump off the cliff and let's build a parachute on the way down kind of thing, right? I never really understood that because that's not really how parachutes work at all. No. If you jump off a cliff and you're hoping to build the parachute or build a plane on the way down,
this is not a cartoon.
Someone hasn't really thought about how gravity works there.
Yeah.
But I do understand, getting that feedback on the way and be like, okay, cool, we're climbing this hill together. And we'll push most of the boulder, but every now and then when we come across a speed bump, you guys help us along a little bit, right? Yeah. You sort of give us the extra push, you give us some direction, and that's it. And I think, having that special status or whatever you want to call them, some companies have sort of advisory boards and I think advisory boards generally work pretty well, but you want to be big enough in some capacity to have an advisory board. If you only have 20, 50, maybe 100 customers, having an advisory board of 10 firms, that's 10% of your client base. It's a bit difficult, but it's possible.
I think it's like a problem of scale that we have not had to deal with yet. But one day, right, it's a good problem.
One day, there you go. Yeah. I mean, honestly, all of these things are, none of these things are that complicated, but they become more complicated because you have all of the other external constraints of, development timelines, on sort of sales targets and roadmaps and all of these other items that you're thinking about. Which just if you have an infinite amount of time to build a perfect product,
infinite money, infinite time,
exactly, infinite resources, it's great. Yes, you will get the best thing, and you can take your time. You can spend a decade building something that's going to be perfect. But sadly, no one has that kind of resources. So.
I don't think so. I think we're getting close to the half hour, and I do have one final question for you, which is, what is the most exciting thing on your roadmap this year?
I can give you the clickbaity answer, but I won't, which is
Oh, come on,
I won't
clickbaity is good.
I think I read something this morning around, this isn't on a roadmap, but it's related to it. I read something on a roadmap around this term about ambient AI.
A what AI?
Ambient AI.
Okay.
I like the term because
I like the term too. I don't know what it means.
sounds very sophisticated, but essentially it's, it's kind of what the assistants are like now. So essentially it's making AI boring again. So it's less of a thing that you invoke and more of a thing that is just there. And funnily enough, I was reading that on my sort of news reader choice app of choice called Reader by Readwise.
Yep.
And they have such a feature, which I only thought about it very meta, because they have something that summarizes all of my articles. So I can read the articles, I can highlight them and all of that. But if I just click on these 3 dots, it has a summary of that article.
Wow.
But I didn't have to do anything to start that summary, right? I saved the article, and as part of the process, it never surfaces it for me.
Yeah.
Unless I just click one button, then I can see the summary.
Ambient AI.
Right? And I was like, I like the idea of it.
Yeah.
It's just making the user interaction just much more seamless.
Yeah.
And that's part of, to answer your actual question, that's a big part of our roadmap. So how do we make the transition from where people are working today, which for our users tends to be Outlook more than anything else, because let's be real, most lawyers spend 90% plus of their time in Outlook.
Outlook a word.
Right?
Yep.
How do we make that transition smoother? So how can we become a persistent thought in their second home? So we'd love to be the second home, but I don't know if we're there yet. But to be a window from their second home that they can look out and get the relevant information.
I love that metaphor. We call these invisible features. But I'm going to change that to ambient features.
I mean, you are actually an AI tool, so you can probably be an ambient AI tool, maybe. But I like the ambience of it. It's a nice term.
I love it. And then, thank you so much for that.
What about you? What's the big thing on your roadmap for this?
Now that is that's a whole different conversation.
I love it.
And I think we'll wrap this up here.
Sounds good.
And I'll share with you our roadmap of the family.
Fair enough. All right.
But thank you again. This has been phenomenal.
Good chatting to you, as always. Yeah.
As always. Looking forward to the next time. Maybe over Zoom.
Maybe over Zoom. Maybe at Ilta.
Not that far away.
Yeah. Quite far. Yeah.